This week I'm joined by Ole Bjerg, who is the author of Poker, the Parody of Capitalism, and Parallax of Growth, the Philosophy of Ecology and Economy. He's also an associate professor at the Copenhagen Business School. In this episode we discuss his book Making Money, the Philosophy of Crisis Capitalism, alongside such topics as ontology, money, being, and the work of Martin Heidegger and Slavoj Zizek. I would like to thank all my patrons for making Hermitix possible, and if you would like to support Hermitix podcast or become part of the Hermitix community, please find our Patreon, donation, merchandise, and Discord links in the description below. Enjoy. Ole Bjerg, thanks for joining us on Hermitix podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we're going to be speaking about your book, which was published in 2014, I believe, Making Money, the Philosophy of Crisis Capitalism.
Yes.
And this work interested me because my master's was continental philosophy, but I was also interested in capitalism. My dissertation was largely on capitalism, but there was very few, should we say, economically centered books which were also treating continental philosophy serious within that domain. So the two primary thinkers you're using are Heidegger and Zizek, but we'll get onto them. So firstly, a bit about you, what it is you do, and what are your interests?
So when I wrote the book, my interests were exactly the things you mentioned. I mean, the book for me was a way of, for me, it was kind of a way to find my own way into understanding the economic situation at the time and just understanding economics generally. I come from a background of sociology, but I think I've always felt that economics or understanding the economy was crucial to understanding what was going on in the world. And then at the same time, most of the economics we were presented with when I was a student and also afterwards was some version of Marxism. And there's a lot of good things to be said about Marxism, but it's not a very, to me, it's not a very good way of sort of understanding the nitty-gritty or technical details of what's going on in international banking, what's going on, what's a central bank, all of that kind of questions is so the book for me was a way of finding my own path into that space. And also actually I'm really happy about your presentation because the book was written exactly for people like you who also had that dual interest. And because I found that among many of my colleagues and students, there were a lot of people were very sort of and still are sort of, they wanted to they were unhappy with the way things were going and they wanted to criticize what was going on. But then at the same time, I felt that a lot of the criticism I heard, it didn't quite hit the mark because it was just too general. It was like, oh, capitalism is bad, it exploits people. It's like, yeah, fine, yeah, we get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's also like an invitation to other people. Come over here, let's look at the money system. It's very, very interesting. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask if you have one, what would be your preferred economic reality?
I thought you were going to ask about my preferred pronoun. So my preferred economic reality, was that what you asked about?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. But I'm afraid I don't have a very flashy. I do have one kind of answer, but it's not gonna. So yesterday, I started the day doing some surfing, and then I spent some time with my son and with my parents, and then in the evening I was reading. I'm studying something called constellations work at the moment, so I was kind of studying that and reading that and stuff. And I remember thinking, wow, this has just been a perfect day, like doing all these kinds of different things. And I was kind of reminded of, I guess that's kind of what Marx hints at when he says, oh, in the morning we can be surfers, and in the afternoon we can be family people, and in the evening we can study, or something along those lines. So in my little mini universe, that would be the that would be the that would be the ideal economic reality. But I don't know. It doesn't really answer your question. But
maybe what I meant was are you as anti-capitalist as the most people in the academy?
No, I don't think I am. But partly because I'm not sure capitalism is a very good term to describe our current economic reality. I think in some ways one of the obviously I'm inspired by a lot of writers, but one economic writer that I'm very inspired by is a guy called Michael Hudson. Mm-hmm. He's an economic historian. So what he says that a lot of the structures or a lot of what's going on at the moment in our economy, he refers to that as financial neo-feudalism. So what he's saying is the problem today is not capitalism. The problem today is feudalism, which is something we didn't we leave that behind 200 years ago? Well, to some extent we did, but at the same time, some things we didn't quite get rid of, and now it seems to be blossoming again, these sort of feudal structures. And what do I mean by feudal, or what does he mean by feudal structures? Well, first of all, you can look at the banking system. If you're just like sort of a classic, like sociology, like myself or whatever, you just, banks, capitalism, bad. But when you look closer at banks, I'm not really sure they're so capitalist after all. Most of their business model is based on the fact that on the one hand, they kind of have this privileged access to the central bank, which is a public institution. We can discuss kind of the constitution of that as well, but it is in many senses a public institution. And then on the other hand, they've also sort of got this privilege that all citizens in the economy are forced to pay their taxes in bank money, right? So that's not very capitalist. That's like it's more like a feudal lord who's sort of receiving these privileges from the king, in a sense, right? And if they didn't have these privileges, if we could pay our taxes in different kinds of money, if they had no privileged access to the central bank, if they had not this, I'm not sure if banks would survive today, or I don't think they would, at least not in the form that they have right now. So in that sense, I think so capitalism is not a very good description of what's going on in the banking system. So so in that sense, if I were to rewrite the book, I think I would tone down my use of the word capitalism. So
okay. I think we'll probably dip back into that, but before we get too deep in, I do need to ask you the Hermitix question. If you can place 3 thinkers, living or dead, in a room and listen in on the conversation, which 3 do you pick?
Can I pick Jesus?
Yeah, anyone, yeah.
Okay, so Jesus, I'd like to hear what he had to say.
Are you Christian?
I think I'm more Christian than I am any of the other ones. I'm definitely more Christian than I'm Muslim. And Jew is just that. I mean, I can't be Jew, so and I can't really come up with anything else that I am more than Christian.
Okay.
So, but I think on the sort of Christian scale, I don't know how high I am. There's a lot of people who are more Christian than I am, but also a lot who are less. So anyway, so Jesus, he would be there, and it has to be thinkers.
No. It could be pretty much anyone.
Yeah, maybe I should. Yeah, when I was a boy, I was very fond of Allan Simonsen, which is a Danish football player. But I'm not. I'm not too sure. He has some very interesting thoughts on contemporary capitalism. Okay, so Jesus, probably not. Yeah, not Allan Simonsen. I guess Heidegger. But then I'm not sure Heidegger is so fun to be around. Really.
No, it didn't sound like it.
No, I mean, of his Silent Side, I think it's the book that's just meant the most to me ever, I think. But again, I'm actually at the moment I'm writing another book at the moment, and in that book I've used a lot of Heidegger, but I also use Kierkegaard.
Mm-hmm.
And Kierkegaard, he's much more. So I think, yeah, Kierkegaard probably more. I think he's more fun in a way. Yeah, or fun to be around at least.
Yeah.
And Christine Lagarde from the ECB.
Who's that?
She's the new director of the ECB, of the European Central Bank.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sort of on the fence with her. I think I've seen her say some really, really good things. And then at the same time, I'm not very, I'm skeptical. I have healthy skepticism towards the European Central Bank. Okay, so yeah, we need to move on. So Jesus, Kierkegaard, and Christine Lagarde, they would be my three.
Okay. So you would use sort of existential thinkers to potentially solve a contemporary problem. Do you think that Kierkegaard and Heidegger would have much to say to about talk about with regards to the ECB?
I'd be curious to hear what they would say, but I'd also be curious to see how Christine Lagarde would react to Jesus.
Jesus and Kierkegaard.
Yeah, so I guess with you, I guess you can ask him anything, isn't it? Doesn't he know everything, or?
Hopefully he'd help out.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not sure I'm doing it justice.
Well, I think meeting Jesus would, that does it justice already, right?
I guess that was it. Yeah. I mean, if you get the chance to meet someone, wouldn't you want to meet? I mean, wouldn't he be your first pick?
Yeah, unless you're of another religion. Okay, maybe. I'm sure Christina will come back in, and maybe Jesus will come back in. Maybe we'll see the light like halfway through, and we'll realize why you picked Jesus.
Yeah.
Why did you primarily use Heidegger and Zizek in making money?
As opposed to other thinkers.
Yeah, were there any others who came up who you thought, these might be able to?
Yeah, there was. So first of all, there was this. So first of all, I was kind of thinking, okay, so in this book, I'm gonna kind of bridge theories about money and economy with continental philosophy. That in itself is quite a task. So I can't afford to also kind of open up the space of philosophy in itself. So I can't have let's discuss the difference between Heidegger's phenomenology and Husserl's phenomenology. That would just be no. So I knew that I had to kind of restrict myself there. And in fact, I think the game was I would just decide on Zizek. At the moment, he was kind of my main vehicle for thinking. So that's kind of I think the rules of the game that I set myself was I could only use Zizek. But then the way I use Heidegger is also merely just to open the question. Mm-hmm. I don't use him so much as we get into the book itself. I don't think he's there so much. So it's basically what I take from him is this ontological question of money, but then it's also just this notion of Seinsvergessenheit, which I really like. This idea that we kind of forgotten about this question of being in his case, and in this case money. Yeah. But I'm sure I could have picked a lot of others, and I also think in retrospect, maybe I could have even written the book without Zizek, or I could have. I mean, Zizek was necessary for me as like a vehicle to understand this field. But sort of afterwards, I think I could have, like Wittgenstein says, this idea about throwing away the ladder after you've climbed it. That's kind of how he thinks about his own philosophy. And I've kind of played around with that thought about whether I would be able to do that with Zizek, sort of kick him away after I kind of had used him to understand money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure, but so with Heidegger, this is sort of the big problem of, or the book starts with this big problem where you reverse. So Heidegger had this. He's moving on from Descartes, who says, "I think, therefore I am." So Heidegger then says, "Well, what the hell is am? What is being? And how is being?" And the problem with Descartes is a definitional problem. It's like if you just keep redefining being, you're getting nowhere. Which is the same problem which you say is happening with money. So we can say, well, $100 equals $100, or gold, a certain amount of gold equals a certain amount of money. But the point you point out that this is sort of a loop. You're not getting anywhere, and you're actually talking about value in itself. So then you ask, how is money? We're talking about the very being of money. We're talking about the ontology of money, and so why do you think that this question is important as opposed to what is money to how is money?
The question what is money is a very imprecise question. So it leads you when you ask this question, it is kind of the standard question, right? And then when you ask it, people think they know what the question means, but they will come up with different types of answers. Someone will say something like, oh yeah, well, money is something we use because otherwise we would have to have a barter economy. So it's like a technical thing. Others will say, or even the same people will say, money is ultimately gold. And then some people will say, which is the worst answer, they will say something like, yeah, money is trust. And then when they say that, when people say money is trust, they kind of say it as if they've said something extremely profound. And I'm like, that's not profound. And it's not even true. I mean, our taxes is not based on trust. It's based on force. Okay, so anyway, the problem with this question, what is money, is that it's imprecise. So what I want to do is ask another question, which, of course, I mean, in itself, so the question is, how is money? So I write the is with italics to sort of emphasize that. How is money is, of course, in and of itself, maybe not so precise, but then I do a lot to kind of say, what do I actually mean by this? And in fact, sometimes you can also say, well, in many ways, or in some ways, the question of what is money, when we look at the theories of money, we actually find that's kind of a big part of the analysis I do in the book, is that I identify three different answers to this question. So the one is this gold story. Oh, it used to be gold, blah, 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 barter economy, blah, blah, blah. So that's one. The other one is, money is whatever the state decides should be money, or money is when the state creates money out of nothing. And then the final one is something along the lines of, is money is debt. So I kind of identify these three answers. So there are three different answers to the question of what is money. And in all three of them have something true in them. There's something in, but neither of them exhausts the question of what money is. So what I try to do is to say, well, the answer to the question, how is money, is found in some sort of interaction between these three other answers. I don't know if that made it more clear. Another thing that gets lost when you just ask this, what is money, is it's not quite clear. What are we asking? Are we asking about sort of the eternal essence of money, or are we asking about the specific contemporary constitution of money? That's not clear. And it also, in a lot of discussions about money, it also tends to get mixed up. There's even a lot of people who still think that we're on some sort of a gold standard. And you might say, well, that's because they are uneducated, they don't know, and which to some extent you can say, well, it's true. I mean, there isn't a gold standard. But I think it also has to do with, there's an element of their mind which kind of resists this idea that you can just create money out of nothing, that there's no value backing it ultimately. And in some sense, they are actually true, that there needs to be something backing the money. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be on a day-to-day basis. Like, for instance, the US dollars, there's nothing really backing the US, or maybe there is, or maybe there isn't. But I think at some point in the not so distant future, we are going to see what happens with a currency which is backed by nothing. Or I'm digressing a little bit here, I think. So anyway, what I do want to mention is that this question of how is money, I say in the second half of the book, I say let's ask the question of how is money today, and then of course I also play on the meaning of how is money is both. It sort of refers to, so what is the constitution of money? How is this system designed on the one hand? But there's also an element of if I were to ask, how are you, James? I'm not asking, you wouldn't say, oh, I'm made up of 80% water and some DNA or whatever it is. I mean, we know what I'm asking about. And in a sense, that's also a question that I'm trying to sort of open in the book is, how is it actually going with our money system? How is it? At the moment, it's not very good, I can say. So, yeah.
Okay, and this difference between the first question, what is money and how is money? This, you point out that in terms of market trading, you can have this difference for Heidegger between the ontic and the ontological, or being and then being.
Yeah.
So ontic would be like regular market trading as we understand it in the first question. What is market trading? Well, we'd understand that in the ontic sense. But then what it's a difficult question. I think it's sort of an ontological one and an epistemological one.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe the ontology of market trading? What's going on there in terms of the being? Because this is where you bring in Zizek, right? And this notions of desire.
I think you're adding something to my.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to credit you here. You're adding. I don't think It's a very good question, and I'm not sure. I know where you're going with it, but But you're also pointing a little bit beyond the text, which is nice. So yeah, I do say something about trading. So in standard sort of financial theory, you would say that the price is whatever a buyer and a seller can agree on. Mm-hmm. And then what happens in finance theory, most finance theory, especially mainstream finance theory, is that they cannot distinguish between price and value. Mm-hmm. So this whole idea of the efficient market hypothesis this idea of efficient markets is that markets have this magical ability to price everything mm-hmm. at its correct value. So things have the value which the market sort of sets. The problem with this idea, there's plenty of problems with it, but sort of the ontological problem with this is that, well, if this were actually true, there would be no trading. Mm-hmm. Because if a buyer and a seller, they may agree on the price, yes, but they must disagree on the value. Mm. If they don't disagree on let's say there's a financial asset and the price is $100, or the buyer and the seller, they agree on a price of $100. Well, then if the seller didn't believe that the true value of this asset was below 100, mm-hmm. he wouldn't sell it. Mm-hmm. And if the buyer didn't think that the true value of this asset was more than $100, he wouldn't buy it. So if both of them thought, yes, the true value of this asset is precisely $100, there would be no reason for them to go through the hassle of trading it. Mm-hmm. So there is this, in a sense, this is kind of also what fits with Zizek's idea of trauma, right? There's something that's kind of his idea of the subject, is that there's always something that's kind of doesn't quite fit together. Mm-hmm. There's always something that's traumatic or something like that. And that's what constitutes the subject. That's what makes us get up in the morning, or that's kind of what, yeah, that's what makes us subjects in the first place, is this. And it's the same with the market. There is this thing that doesn't fit, which is value, this elusive notion of value. So anyway, so to answer your question, yeah, I would say that's the ontological question, or the ontological constitution of the market, is this constant disagreement on value, and then a constant agreement on price. And the first one tends to get lost in a way in the way we tend to talk about markets. I think it's one of the major flaws in economics today, not just finance, but any branch of economics, is the failure to distinguish between price and value. Yeah, it's also what you find. It's also one of the reasons why mainstream economics, they don't really know what to do about nature. They don't know what to do about, there's no more fish in the sea, there's no more, all these kind of problems, because the only thing they can see is prices. They can't see value, right? Mm-hmm.
And so this what you describe as a trauma, the thing that doesn't fit, this is sort of where I read that for Zizek, being influenced by Lacan, is where the lack comes in. So there's this thing which we are sort of perpetually searching for, which we can't put our finger on. Our, what Lacan calls the object petit a, and it's like a pure void. We can't find it, but we're always going for it. So that's why we need a market. That this price is put on something that we can't find. That in this way, the market's sort of using us, just to drive itself. It's the market only works. I think you do state this a few times. The market only works because there is a nothingness for it to play around with.
Yeah.
So it's using our, sort of almost abusing our desire, which we have no clue what it is.
Yeah, that is true. Although it's funny to have this conversation, because it's been it's 6 years since the book came out, and it's probably 7 or 8 years since some of the text at least is 7 to 8, maybe 9 years old. So there's some things where I've kind of moved a little bit, and I get my own words back in my face, which is really good. It's a huge privilege.
Well, you're welcome to talk about what progressions have come since.
It's just, now that I listen to it, there's something about the way that we give, and I've probably done that myself in the book, I'm sure, sort of give agency to the market itself. You're kind of saying, so the market is using us and all this. And I think it's one of the places where I've moved a little bit, where I think that the more we talk about the market or capitalism in those terms, the more we also disempowering ourselves in a way. There's something in that. And I think we talked about Marx in the beginning. I think that's one of the places where I think Marxism, or many Marxists, they kind of go wrong in a way. It's a little bit like I kind of feel the same way about conspiracy theories. I mean, on the one hand, I like conspiracy theories. I like both the ones that are true, and I also like the ones that aren't true. But what I really do like about them is that they kind of insist on asking these fundamental questions, maybe not ontological questions, but fundamentally ontic questions. But what I don't like, or the things sometimes where I kind of pull off with some conspiracies, is when you kind of get the impression that the conspiracy is so big and so all-encompassing that there's nothing we can do about it. That I don't like, because it's kind of disempowering us. Then I think, then we might as well just die or join the conspiracy or whatever if you can. I don't know if that's possible even. But and I feel the same way about Marxism sometimes, is that if we sort of perpetuate or this capitalism everywhere, all pervasive, blah blah blah, or we could also say neoliberalism, it's everywhere, blah 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 blah, then there's nothing you can do about it. So it sort of sucks energy out of you. Yeah, it's like a vampire in a sense. So okay, anyway, and I was that's just kind of what struck me when you said this thing about the market abusing us, because I must say, so you asked also about what is my preferred economic reality. In many ways, I mean, there's parts about the market, to the extent that we can even talk about, or markets, that's also great. I think there's some great things about markets, but I think the problem is that many of the markets that we have today, they're not free, first of all. There's monopolies and there's all kinds of, So, but there's something great just about this sort of basic feature of people coming together and, I can do this, I can do that, and then they trade and stuff. There's something good about that. But your question was about, it was actually about Lacan and Zizek, wasn't it? Yeah, about this void.
Yeah, so the market using our desire. But one thing, while you're on that tangent though of all-encompassing things, I do just want to bring in this quote from you.
All right. Get my own medicine here. Thank you.
Maybe, hopefully you've moved from this, because you say the difference of opinion in today's political landscape is measured not by whether you are for or against capitalism, but how you are for capitalism. So do you think that... So then you were saying that basically capitalism's got everyone, maybe that's what you're saying, and it's the ways in which we work with it, but we're all still working with it. Do you think now that there are people outside of capitalism then, or systems that are...
I would actually, if I were to rewrite it, or I would say the exact same thing, but opposite. I would say, so the difference of opinion in today's political landscape is not measured by whether you're for or against capitalism, but how you are against capitalism. I think that's one. When I look at the political landscape today, that's one of the things that really strikes me, is that most, if not all, political positions today kind of define themselves as being on the defensive. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They are kind of, they define themselves as being, if not victims, then at least sort of, they may not all of them be against the system. However, they all have the sense that the system is against them. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Yeah. So I don't know, I'm digressing again here, but I need to say that, so yesterday there was a demonstration in Copenhagen with on this Black Lives Matter thing. Mm-hmm. Now I'm sitting here in my summer house at the other end of the country, so it's not something I was, And first of all, I don't understand it. I mean, yes, it's bad. Of course, they shouldn't have killed this guy, and the guy who did it, of course, he should be punished. No question about it. And this blah blah blah. But anyway, so what happened is a lot of people come together, and the police was there, and everything was calm. And then afterwards, I saw that there was this tweet from the police saying, "Oh, everyone behaved really good, and thank you," and all that. Where I was like, okay, so who's against this, or where's the? Maybe I can see some of it in the US, certainly, but in Denmark, I don't get it, to be honest. But at the same time, the people in this demonstration have this sense that the system is against them. Mm-hmm. Now we're standing up to the system. But what part of the system is it that is against you? The police are even tweeting out saying how great you are. I mean, I don't get, and there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of that going on, but also on the to the extent that I think it's safe to say that the Black Lives Matter is probably more of a left thing, but also on the right, which is something that's I've been thinking a lot about lately, is that among conservatives and liberals, there's also this idea that the system is against them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That their sort of core values are being discarded, basic freedom rights are being taken away and stuff like that. So I've kind of asked myself, where I was also thinking, imagine, so I mentioned conspiracy theories. Imagine that there's let's say the conspiracy, let's say it's what could it be, like the Bilderberg or whatever they're called, or the lizards or whatever. But they probably have these meetings where all the lizards come together. So imagine all the lizards are sitting there. And I wonder if all the lizards or the shape-shifting or whatever, so they sit there. I wonder if they're saying the same things. Oh, the system is against us, and they're against lizard lives matter, and I wonder if even the conspirator finds that the system is against. So it seems like all political positions today are kind of like the system is against us. Maybe I'm just Anyway, that's
No. I do understand what you're saying there. That you could almost say the ontology of capitalism is one where I think if you've read any Deleuze or Guattari, they go on about this, that the ontology of capitalism itself, constantly avoids definition, which is why people have so many problems with it, because you can't. Yeah. It will either use what you have or just not bother with it. So it's constantly evasive. So really it's sort of like the market problem again, which you outline, is all these people who are constantly protesting, they're doing so from every different angle, but they're all protesting against nothing that can be defined, because they can't, none of these have specific aims. It's always like you said, down with the system. It's like, well, okay, well, what's the system? Capitalism. Okay, well, what's capitalism? We don't really know.
It's the same with feminism. It's impossible to debate feminism, because it's like it is itself a shape-shifting lizards. Whenever you say something, it'll just shape and say, I'm a feminist, but I'm not that kind of, and then it's I think feminism even more evasive or elusive than capitalism. So, but it's true. I think that's also what I like about Michael Hudson, is that he just then turns it around. So what he's saying, he says, so in a sense you could kind of say, well, he's saying the problem with capitalism is that it's not capitalist. So he kind of throws it back at them. Mm-hmm. And then he says the problem, and he redefines the problem. He says the problem isn't capitalism, the problem is feudalism. Mm-hmm. And then it's just, whoa, that I really like. I think that there's really some power in that. I was actually, you asked about other philosophers, why there weren't other philosophers, or if there were other. Actually, before I wrote the money book, I wrote a book about poker. Mm-hmm. And I also used Zizek for that one, but I also used Baudrillard. Jean Baudrillard.
Jean Baudrillard,
Yeah. And he has this idea of critique that I really like, where he says, so critique, what you need to do is you need to figure out the logic of whatever you're critiquing, the logic of that system. Instead of then going against that, going in opposition to it, saying, oh, here's capitalism. Now I found out how it's working. I'm anti-capitalist. I don't want to, then you should accelerate that logic.
This is exactly what I wrote my thesis on. Accelerationism.
Oh! Wow!
Accelerating capitalism until, to push it to the limit. Because we're on about what Baudrillard was on about, if you go back, capitalism will always subsume that back into the system in some form. Yeah. So, and there's tons of thinkers. I mean, Nietzsche was actually the first to mention accelerating. Wow. He doesn't specifically go on accelerating capitalism, but then Deleuze and Guattari specifically state accelerate the process of capitalism. So what was your conclusion of why that should be done in that book on poker?
I was not saying it should be. I was saying that's what I was saying that's what poker is doing. I was kind of trying to tease out sort of the critical elements of poker. Mm-hmm. The book was called Poker, and then subtitle was Parody of Capitalism. So the idea was that poker is kind of this. It's making a muck out of capitalism, mm-hmm. in the sense that it's kind of saying, I don't know if you can. Do you remember that? Do you remember Crocodile Dundee?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember that scene where he travels to whatever, LA or New York, some, and then he runs around this blonde woman, and then this thug, this gangster, this sort of street guy, he comes up to him with a knife and threatens them with a knife, sort of just a little knife, and of course the woman is like, oh, Dundee, give him your money, and then Crocodile, like, he's completely cool. And then he pulls out this jungle knife, or this kind of like a half, and then he says, that's not a knife, this is a knife. And then he pulls out this long, huge, and in a sense, that's kind of what poker says to capitalism. It kind of says, that's not capitalism, this is capitalism. And in a sense, poker is, in a sense, if capitalism was actually capitalism, I think it would look more like poker. There's more like the rules are clear. There's an element of chance, but it's the same for everyone, and blah 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 blah. There's an honesty to poker which I don't think you find in like the banking system, for instance. Mm-hmm. If you go into a big game of poker and you lose your money, you go in there and you know there's a risk I'm going to lose my money. That's what it is, and you lose it, and then you take it as a man, and then you leave. But if you buy a house, for instance, and get a loan or do other kinds of interactions with a bank, it's not like they kind of pretend that you can't lose, and then it's much more sort of weird. And then you have the state actor also in capitalism. Anyway, we're again digressing.
No, it's interesting. So the rules of capitalism then are tied up with desire, bureaucracy, other forms of government procedure which get in the way, and debt and things like that. Whereas the rules of poker are like super clear cut. Yeah. And poker in a way does what capitalism wants to do, which is poker acts like a test kit. Like, does this hand work?
Yes.
No,
yes.
Won't use that again. Does this hand work? Yes. Yes. And then you refine and you refine. Yes. And there's different strategies. Like, I was really into poker for a long time, so there's like Doyle Brunson going really hard in. Like, what was his technique? What was Doyle's? Doyle's technique was like, if you're going in, bet loads, and then there's I can't remember the guy who could read cards really well, but still within that is clear cut. Whereas the capitalism itself, testing things, is caught up in desire and that kind of thing. So how would we change capitalism?
There's another thing about poker and capitalism, is that in poker develops your character. There's something about, and it also shows your character in a sense. It kind of shows the way you win, the way you lose, and that's not to say. There's a lot of poker, just like anyone. A lot of the assholes, some of them, and some of them are not, or something. But there's a display of character in that. Your kind of true colors show. That's not the same in capitalism. There's ways of making money in capitalism where you don't really kind of show your character, and you have these. Anyway, I just got. I remember when I wrote the poker book, I think it's the book I've written where I had the most fun writing. Mm-hmm. There's just, and that's not to say there's also human tragedy in poker and stuff. That's not, but still, there's something about this. There's a purity of that game, or even games as such. There's a purity and a playfulness and something like that. And I think, coming back to this for or against capitalism, I think my problem with capitalism is, I think there's a potential for that in capitalism. There's certainly some of that in capitalism. Of course, there's innovation, entrepreneurship, all these kinds of things. But I think there's too many things which sort of block that or goes against that. Take the EU, for instance. So the EU, the idea of the EU was, let's expand this free market, all this blah, blah, blah. And what we have now is this bureaucratic monster without any pure political leadership, and all these rules and all these, and now also the ECB and this currency, which is a complete failure. And to me, it's kind of it's not bringing out the best in capitalism. It's doing the opposite. It's it's bringing out sort of the worst, sort of this feudalist elements in capital is sort of brought to the fore by institutions like that. So we should organize the EU as a big poker game instead.
So really, you're along the lines of those people who say that we haven't really seen capitalism yet. We've just seen like a bastardized form of it.
Yeah, that's a version of the kind of like, we haven't seen socialism yet. I think we've seen some of it, and I think, but I'm also not sure to what extent that question, even in what context would that question make sense, or why would we be interested in answering that question?
Well, I think it'd be, I guess on the general level, I think would be that there's an assumed responsibility for the system which governs you to give you a better standard of living. So you could argue that increased capitalism would give a better standard of living, whereas socialists would argue that socialism gives a better standard of living. Maybe that's a bit of a utilitarian argument, but that would be my thing. Is if you don't hinder it, we'll have greater productivity, etc., etc.
But again, it's I don't know if I'm also a little bit older than when I wrote the book. Maybe I'm getting a little bit too pragmatic here. But my problem is, so after I wrote the money book, I wrote a book about growth. So it was a terrible title. I regret it. It was called The Parallax of Growth. It's like sort of, but it's a good book. But it's a terrible title. And the reason I wrote that book was, I wanted to understand growth, and I wanted to also understand or say something about this sort of, what's this deal about climate crisis and all this. But then, and as I was writing the book, I think I was kind of I was sort of critical towards the idea of growth. No, we shouldn't have growth. We should have degrowth. But then after I'd written the book, I sort of came to the conclusion that the question of whether we should have growth or no growth or degrowth, it doesn't make sense to me anymore, because I don't know what growth is. It's just too elusive. And I kind of think I feel the same way about capitalism, is that it's just, or at least in terms of describing the society, I think that the concept is becoming less and less relevant. Look at what's happening now, the Corona crisis. How on earth does it help you to start a conversation about what the Corona crisis, what that means? Does it make sense to start that conversation with a question that involves the word capitalism? I'm curious. I know you're interviewing me, but what would you think about? How would you make sense of the Corona crisis in terms of capitalism, or something that had something to do with capitalism?
I usually attend these things from like Deleuze and Guattari's point of view. So I would say that capitalism would understand that and find all the potential from it. So in terms of productivity, we realize that actually a lot of people can work from home now. So capitalism would understand that, and that would then become the constant. So I think after coronavirus, more people will work at home because there's greater productivity and less resource output. But like less people need to drive, and less people need to. But you can also understand from the coronavirus like where people's priorities are, right? So, what sales go up, what sales go down, like what do people really, really want, So that would be my reading, is that capitalism would just learn from it like it does any other event. But then once again, this is the problem of ontology, because I'm just sort of saying capitalism, and it's like I'm almost talking about it like it's a being or that's. But I like to think of it as it's like an intelligence. There is some form of intelligence going on there as like an assemblage. There's no like unified being, but there's something that is learning. That would be my reading. Yeah.
I kind of get that. I kind of get that, and I also do think that there are elements of that. But at the same time, there's two things. The one is, I don't understand what capitalism wants with us. Why would it want that? And also when you say, well, then we can all work from home and we'll be more productive. And then I have to, this is said in a closed circle, but we're not doing anything. We're not doing it. I mean, if I look at my own work, what am I doing? I mean, or yeah, of course, I mean, if I break it, and now when I'm done with this, I'm gonna read some essays that my students have written, and that's meaningful, and I love my students, and they put a lot of work in this, and it's great. So that's, but at the same time, it's all, I mean, but from the point of view of capitalism as this sort of higher being, does it really care whether I grade more student essays or not? That I don't know. I think it's also one of the, it's also one of the things that kind of puzzles me with conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. Or there's all these accounts of, oh, this doesn't fit, or this doesn't work, or this is, they say this, but this is really what's blah blah blah. And a lot of the, they're absolutely right about some of it, and then some of it is a little bit off the mark. But there's one key question, which I don't think any conspiracy theorists have a good answer to, is what does the conspiracists, what do they want with us? What is the end game? Why are they, I mean, okay, let's say they faked the moon landing, for instance. Why would they go through all of the trouble of faking the moon? What do they want with me? Or what is the end game? Oh yeah, so we faked the moon landing, we killed this guy, and we whatever they've done. Yeah, I get that. But what is the end game? I don't understand that. And because let's say they are these shape-shifting lizards. Well, why do they? If they could just kill us, then I mean, if you can turn yourself into a lizard, I'm sure you can just kill me with a stroke of a. I mean, why don't they just do that immediately? Okay, I'm digressing here, but it's still relevant because I think maybe it's because I think there's a homology between some elements between Marxism and even Deleuzianism, or whatever you like to call it, mm-hmm. and conspiracy theories.
Okay.
In the sense that you kind of say there's this, it's this, you turn capitalism into this agent that kind of has a plan, it has tactics, it has a strategy, it seems to have a will of its own. But what I don't get is what does it want with me? What does capitalism want with me? And why does it even care?
My argument there would be that you're viewing it from a human point of view, so notions of care would be entirely different from capitalism. I think like Deleuze and Guattari, they lean towards that all it wants is increased growth. So it's like positive oriented. So it's just compound, like positive orientation, so it just builds itself over and over again. And that's all it would ever want, is just to keep growing. So then and then you get back to the question, what is growth?
Yeah, growth of what? Because there's plenty of things that we get less of in capitalism. So yes, capitalism is growing stuff. So the kind of the standard answer is, so capitalism, well, it wants to grow money, or it wants more money. But I've studied money now for almost 10 years. If that's what they wanted, they could just create it. Period. I mean, they don't know. They don't have to. I mean, in order for capitalism to grow money, they don't have to go to all of the trouble of whatever is going on with the corona virus, and I have to work from home and go all to that, all fake the moon landing, whatever it is. I'm mixing things up here, but they can just, if that's all they wanted. If they were just out to get as much money as they could just create it.
But then that does come back to the fundamental question in your book, which is like, if they just created money, there would be an understanding. It's like it's like when people just print money, you end up with hyperinflation. It's an understanding that the value underlying the money isn't growing itself. So then this is a question. If there's growth, then it would be a question of capitalism trying to grow the actual value. But then you'd have to define what is valuable.
Yeah, exactly.
What's valuable to capitalism? My argument would be intelligence, forms of intelligence.
But what's the end game of capitalism then?
Would you want to? Well, my theory goes.
Yeah. I want to hear your take on it.
My theory goes from another philosopher called Nick Land, who's written about this for years, which is instead of the means of production emancipating us, the means of production emancipates itself, and we're just left behind. So capitalism, like it's quite literally, capitalism wants the singularity, like complete AI. But that's why it wants more and more intelligence to develop AI, intelligence explosion.
And what? Okay. No, I get it. I certainly see it as it's a good way of. But then when you get to that point, then what happens? When you get to singularity, what are they going to do with this?
Well, that's when I think you get into conjecture, because from our point of view, what they want just wouldn't make any sense, right? But then there's so many questions around AI. But this is fundamentally a question of ontology. You know, what does its being want? What is its being targeted towards? Like teleology is, and the end is just a question of ontology as well. So,
do you think? So people for people who are into such ideas about capitalism, is it possible that this is a psychoanalytical analysis of it, but is it possible that what they really are hoping for is that there is actually something or someone out there who wants something from them?
Well, this is exactly what you get into your book, that capitalism gives everyone that, doesn't it? It gives people, it outlines what desire is. It gives you sorry, yeah.
No. I'm don't say sorry because I'm interrupting you. So it's But I'm kind of thinking. So what if capitalism doesn't work the way Deleuze says? What if the problem is not that it wants everyone to do more? What if it's actually the other way around? That it's failing to do that. It doesn't want anything from it. Or there's a lot of people from whom capitalism doesn't want anything. Yeah. And then these people feel kind of disenfranchised, or more basically. I mean, imagine if you're a person and no one wants anything from you. I mean, that's worse than death. Probably. I mean, if you really feel, there's no one who wants anything from me. That's terrible. That's terrible. So I think, if you are in that situation, or if you just have that kind of feeling in you, maybe there's some form of constellation or consolation in joining in a critique or in an analysis saying, oh, capitalism, there's this capitalism that's very, very interested in me. It wants everything from me, blah, 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 blah. It's a little bit like the same. So we have this critique of Facebook, for instance, and which I think I hate Facebook. So, but on the one hand, there's these people who say, oh yeah, Facebook, it wants to sort of, it's interested in all my personal details and all this. And then maybe there's like a hidden desire for that, a hidden desire for someone or something to actually be interested in my most intimate details.
So when we go to, you use the symbolic, the real and the imaginary, capitalism is like our grand symbol of meaning. Its mechanisms are what give us meaning, even in abstract. So it's not actually the items of our desire that matters. It's the fact that at least this system is giving me something. You know, this system knows me, knows I exist.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yes. Yeah. I would, so
what's the real then? What's the real there? What's real?
I would probably even relegate it to the domain of the imaginary. So capitalism is this imaginary big other supposed to be interested in all the disenfranchised young people who don't know what the world wants from them. And then what is the real here? I don't know. Some of it would probably, we need to do the analysis. I mean, there would be some of it would be this turning point between, on the one hand, me complaining about how capitalism want all this stuff from me, and then at the same time, me longing for capitalism or for someone or something to actually want something from me. Yeah, I can't help thinking that so in the university, which is kind of my world, or part of my world at least, there's this on the one hand, there's this complaint that, we need to publish so much, we have to write all these journal papers and all this stuff. So there's, on the one hand, there's this idea that, there's something, and some people call it neoliberalism or something like that. They want this, they want to pull out all our ideas out of us. And then at the same time, also in the US, there's a big sorrow about the fact that no one reads. Most of the texts that are written in the university are not read by anyone, or at least they're not read by anyone who's genuinely interested in the text. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is once you start actually not just thinking about that but taking that in, it just makes you so sad. Yeah. So there's this dual thing, and I would kind of think that the real would be sort of in the intersection between those two lines, so to speak. I think I would need to think a little bit more about it.
One question nearing the end here. I noticed there was a video up. You commented on Bitcoin. Do you think that after all your research into finance and money, do you think Bitcoin? Where do you stand on it? Do you think it might be the future of money?
That's a good question. I was into Bitcoin for a while, and I actually it's actually, I will say this. You kind of think, you can't make money on philosophy and blah blah blah, and you should go. I think it's one of the areas where I have actually made money on philosophy. I mean, if it hadn't been for philosophy, I wouldn't have seen Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. I saw it quite early, and I actually bought some of them at an early point. I also screwed up a little bit because I wanted to trade some of the other more funky cryptocurrencies. So, but I did. Yeah, I did make some money on it. I also had some sleepless nights over it. So I was kind of my old research in compulsive gambling sort of came back to me in the sense of I could kind of sense no, I need to get out of this also. Anyway, that's yeah. But do I think that Bitcoin is the future? I mean, with Bitcoin as such, as Bitcoin, that specific currency, I have no clue what's going to happen to that.
Oh no, I mean cryptocurrency.
But I do think that there are. I'm sure that some cryptocurrencies are going to be key elements of a future monetary system. I'm sure. I don't think it's going to be like, then we have this new cryptocurrency, which is just going to be like the one currency to rule them all. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we will move to a more multipolar world, both in terms of geopolitics, but also in terms of currencies. So one of the most recent things I've seen is that now the Chinese central bank are developing a digital yuan. So what's happening is that the People's Bank of China, I guess that's what their central bank is called, is opening its own balance sheet to everyone, basically, so that you can hold money directly with digital money directly with the Chinese central bank. What that's going to look like, we don't know that yet. But also, just to be, that's not a cryptocurrency. I mean, that's a state currency, obviously. But that's going to I think that's going to happen, and then we're going to see other reactions. I think for 10 years I've been preaching that the dollar will collapse, and it hasn't quite happened yet. But I will still preach it. I'm sure the dollar is going to collapse at some point, and when that happens, that's going to leave a vacuum to be filled with other things. And part of that vacuum is going to be filled with by the Chinese, I'm sure. If the Europeans could get their act together, they could also fill some of it. I doubt that's going to happen, though. But then I could also see some of that space being filled by cryptocurrencies in some form or another.
So you say you're working on a new book?
Yes.
Yeah. What's it on, and is it out anytime soon?
So the title of the book is called "The Question of Being Man."
Okay.
So it's I'm proofreading the final 60 pages now. So the book, like the content, will be finished in a week, but then I just send it to a publisher, and they're looking at it. So these things can take some time. And it, in many ways, I mean, on the one hand, you can kind of say, "Oh, weren't you the money guy?" And now what you're writing about men? What's that? But for me, the two, it's not so far from the money book as you would think. So it actually also there's a lot of Heidegger in it, and it starts from a similar point than as the money book. So the money book starts from a point where it says we seem to have forgotten this, even though we talk about money and economy all the time, we seem to have forgotten about this basic question of money. How is money? Where does money come from? I feel the same way about men and women. There's so much talk about gender and feminism and blah, 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 all this. And I'm very interested in it. I'm very interested in what it means to be a man. I'm also partially or somewhat interested in what it means to be a woman, but I'm more interested in what it means to be a man because I am a man myself. So and I think it's a hugely important topic. At the same time, it's a topic which has been completely neglected by philosophy for 100 years at least. And then you would think, wow, what are you talking about? There's gender theory everywhere. The problem with gender theory is the equivalent, well, within the field of so these issues of men and women, gender theory is the equivalent of neoclassical economics. They're so similar. And just like neoclassical economics kind of talks about economy all the time and money and stuff, and yet it kind of forgets the most important question, which is where does money come from? What is money? Where does it come from? All that. And it's the same with gender theory. It kind of forgets the most important question, which is what's the meaning of being a man? Or what's the meaning of being a woman, for that matter? That question, or those two questions, are completely, it's impossible. As soon as you've said the word gender, you can't ask these questions. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is to say, first of all, I want to talk about these issues and not use the word gender. And secondly, I'm trying to write this book only about men. So I'm not saying very much or anything. I'm trying to say as little as possible about what it means to be a woman. I think that someone else has to write that book. Maybe someone has already written it, could be. But I want to address this question of the meaning of being man. What does that actually mean? Yeah.
Unless there's anything else you'd like to add, or something we've missed.
Oh, I think we missed a lot. I feel like I really enjoyed the conversation, and I will say, I mean, having someone read your work like you have read mine is just it's a huge privilege. It's a huge privilege. So I'm extremely grateful for that, and I think for me it's just like, since you're so familiar with it, I couldn't help just taking the opportunity to just dive into it. So I apologize for if I've digressed a little bit, and then I don't really mean that when it comes to it, but I really enjoyed the conversation, and it was also a chance for me to sort of revisit some of my old thoughts. So yeah, thank you.